views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hi, and welcome to OpenBX RX Tuesday on BronxNet, a weekly program providing you the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Kibin, Alleyne, and today is Tuesday, October 19th. Coming up, sculptures tower Union Square after the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor sparked a nationwide discussion on racial injustice and police brutality. Artist of the sculpture joins us for a discussion on his work. Do the statues serve a greater purpose? Then, street vendors. They're a staple to the life of many shopping districts in our borough, but are they being unfairly targeted by the city? After that, flu season is quickly approaching as we move towards the colder months. A Montefiore health expert joins us for a discussion on what you can do to protect yourself. Is the flu shot just as important as the vaccine? And a group of Bronx individuals and local organizations called the Bronx-Wide Coalition is planning for the future of the Bronx. How will that future include you? So please stick around. OpenBX RX Tuesday starts now. Welcome to OpenBX RX Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Kibin, Alleyne, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. In 2020, the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor sparked a nationwide discussion on racial injustice and police brutality. Shortly after, statues in honor of Floyd, Taylor, and late U.S. Representative and civil rights activist John Lewis towered Union Square in New York City. Artist of the statues, Carnabuci, joins us today for a discussion on his work. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
So your sculptures recently made headlines, but I kind of want to go back a little. Can you just tell us what was going through your mind the moment you decided to create these sculptures?
Well, it all started after George Floyd was killed and the world sort of erupted. And I remember sitting with my wife and she turned to me and said, "You need to do a sculpture of George Floyd." And I totally got it. It was a moment in time that I wanted to sort of capture, a significant moment in our history. And I thought the best way to do it was what I do. I'm a sculptor, so I went ahead and I did a small piece of George Floyd. It was 20 inches tall. And then one thing led to the next, and that a picture of the sculpture was seen by Terrence Floyd, George's brother. And so he saw this because he was working on his We Are Floyd Foundation. So he saw this sculpture and thought it would be great to sort of sync the art with his foundation in an effort to bring awareness to what he was doing. And that's what it was from the start, and that's what it is today. It's the exhibit is an effort to, on a higher level, raise awareness, of course, of injustice, but specifically to raise awareness and funds for the We Are Floyd Foundation, Justice for Breonna, and the John and Lillian Lewis Foundation. So that's how it all got started, from an idea that my wife had about doing a sculpture of George Floyd. And then as we were in conversation with Terrence, I thought that it could be part of a larger exhibit. So it made sense to include Breonna Taylor. Obviously, there's some commonality between Breonna and George Floyd. But then I thought it would make perfect sense to have one of the early civil rights activists and a man that I've had tremendous amount of respect for, John Lewis. And so that's how the three came together to form the See Injustice exhibit.
Now, as you mentioned, this happened after the horrific events in 2020. Have you ever been inspired before to kind of make art based on events that happen, whether it's regarding racial injustice or any type of injustice?
This was the first exhibit that was done explicitly to bring awareness to a particular issue. Um, Previous to this, I had done one called Mariposita, which is a 20-foot sculpture of a female figure emerging from an egg. And that, to a lot of people, represented the strength and beauty of the feminine spirit. Um, Although it wasn't my intention originally to sort of push that narrative, it just happened to be that way. In this case, it was fully intentional, right at the top, to to present an exhibit that brings about this awareness of injustice, and more specifically to help in that small way that I can as a sculptor, the foundations that we're now affiliated with.
So these sculptures are massive, and I feel like there's no way you can't look at them. Can you tell us about the creative process behind bringing this artwork to life?
Sure thing. I'll try not to bore your audience, but it starts with a 3D model. In this case, models that were developed by a father-son team, Daniel and Rodman Edwards. So I take that model, which is a virtual model, and I bring it through a couple of different programs, one of which allows me to slice or sort of deconstruct that model into layers. And then there's a number of different things that I need to do to modify each one of those layers. And by the way, each sculpture has about 200 different layers. Once everything has been programmed, then I bring it to a CNC machine, which is this large robotic sort of computer controlled router. And then I can do actual fabrication, actual production, where I'm cutting, numbering them, sanding them, and then I get to a point where I can start stacking them, and they slowly but surely sort of create what ends up being a sculptural interpretation of that original 3D model. And so for this particular exhibit, I went one step further, and I did a metallic bronze finish on the wood, because otherwise it's a wood sculpture that's vulnerable because of the nature of the material. And so I wanted to add that layer of protection, but in a way that gave it another, dimension, right? And that edginess of metallic bronze. So that's my process.
Now, can you explain what emotion you wanted to invoke in people who walk past these sculptures?
That's a good question, and I've asked myself that a number of times. At the end of the day, I don't have a particular emotion in mind that I want to evoke, that I want to evoke from people. As a sculptor, what my job is to create an environment, a venue, a physical pocket where people can gather and share each other's opinions and engage in civil discourse, to understand possibly each other's perspectives, and that's what my job is. And in having an exhibit there in Union Square, I mean, it's a perfect venue because obviously people will gather and will not only have that internal, that sort of introspection, of how they personally feel about the sculpture, um, but also be able to communicate those feelings with others. And I think that's sort of key, because if we can come to some sort of understanding of each other's perspectives, maybe you can have decent dialogue and hear each other out.
So, can you also speak a little bit more about Union Square? Because I understand there's a little bit of significance for why it's there.
Uh, a little bit, sure. The First of all, it's an iconic place, right? And there've been protests and rallies, um, for hundreds of years. So we thought that, and we were so lucky that Union Square and all the other organizations that needed to sort of approve of this exhibit allowed us to exhibit there, because it is that iconic space. Not, it's got a storied history of, like I said before, rallies and protests against, injustice and anything else. So we do feel quite privileged to be there.
And according to the New York Times, you actually sought out the approval of the families first. Can you explain why that was important for you?
Absolutely. We couldn't have done this without the support of the families. And the reason is because we wanted to lend the art to what they were doing. So it wasn't ever about what I wanted. It's about what I could do to help out the We Are Floyd Foundation and the other foundations that I mentioned before. So in that case, we needed to get the support and, if you will, approval from the families, which we did, in order to proceed.
Now, how did you feel when you heard the news someone actually vandalized the statue?
I was really pissed, to be honest with you, but I wasn't shocked. It happened before. Um, you know, like I said, it wasn't shocking. Just, to me, there are much better ways to express one's opinion than to damage an object. I mean, it's an object that has meaning beyond its physical condition, but it's an object. And by damaging the object, you're not damaging the meaning or the message. And in this case, you're amplifying it, because we're talking about it now. You're sort of amplifying the message. And I wasn't happy that this act gave me an opportunity to talk with you or with anyone else about it. But as it turns out, that's what happened. And it just, like I said, very high risk, very low reward act on the part of the vandal. But it's a perfect illustration of why, we need to keep talking, and there's a long way to go.
And I want to know quickly, why do you think they only targeted George Floyd's statue?
I think that a lot of people look at the sculpture and say, why are we, honoring the life of a man? And then they'll go on and list the various things that they heard about this man's life and that they disapprove with. And to that, I would say, don't think of it as sort of hero worshiping or, honoring a man's life, that a man who I knew nothing about. But think of it as the death of this man caused a worldwide movement that resonates today. And where were you in the summer of 2020? And try to just understand that it is a memorial to the killing of George Floyd, and such that we should never forget what happened. And that's why we have a sculpture of George Floyd. And apparently there are some people that, for whatever reason, can't get around that.
So, can you just tell us, where can people get in touch with you when it comes to these statues?
Well, each one of the sculptures has a QR code, right? Like literally on the sculpture itself. And from there, there's information about me. There's information about Confront Art, which is the curator of the exhibit. But more importantly, there's information about the various foundations with whom we are affiliated through this exhibition. And it's through there where you can read up on what those foundations stand for, what their needs are, and maybe, ways to participate. But look, literally everything is on the Sketch. If you aren't able to go there, then you can go to the confrontart.com website, which will have all of the information that you need.
All right, Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
We'll be right back.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting
to the new reality.
Reporting from Bronxnet, this is Carina.
Welcome back. Street vendors. They're a staple to the life of many shopping districts in the Bronx, selling food, clothes, jewelry, and more. According to the Street Vendor Project, these small business owners have become victims of New York's aggressive policies.
Quiero que me pague mis frutas. No quiero un sorry. Quiero que nos dé licencia a todos mis compañeros vendedores y que cambie las leyes. Mis hijos no van a comer con un sorry. Mis hijos comen de mi propio trabajo que yo tengo, de vender mi fruta, luchar todos los días para que llevarle un plato de comida. No fue injusto lo que ustedes me hicieron. Usted como autoridad no debe de poner usted el ejemplo.
Here to further discuss the treatment of street vendors in New York City and what they're doing to help is Carina Kaufman-Gutierrez of the Street Vendor Project. Carina, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So let's quickly talk about that video. Diana was a woman who experienced these aggressive policies and says she can't feed her kids with a sorry. I found that to be a very powerful statement. Can you explain how you felt seeing that and, what it speaks to as the work of a street vendor?
Yeah, there's about 20,000 street vendors in New York City, folks who sell both food and merchandise, and they're so critical to the economy as well as the culture of New York City. And, I think for so long, however, there have been systemic discrimination baked into our street vending policies where folks like Diana, who are exactly who the city should be supporting to grow her business, right? She's an immigrant woman of color who has been, working for over 5 years, selling fresh fruits and produce in her neighborhood. She's a small business owner, right? She's exactly who is needing the support of the city to grow her business. So but unfortunately, there's been so many years of discrimination against street vendors that what happened to her was actually sanctioned by the city, right? I think it's very important to see those are city policies in action that led to her fruits and vegetables being discarded. And so hearing her say, I can't feed my kids with a sorry, it's so true. She needs actual support systems so that, one, she's able to bring back her produce, right? Be able to reinvest in her business. Two, have the ability to get a permit so that this can never happen again. And three, actual support systems. It's not just about surviving. It's also about how can she grow, right? What are the things the city can do to help her?
So before we go deeper into that, I want to talk about Street Vendor Project. You aim to support small business owners. Can you tell us about your organization and how it actually began?
Sure. So we are a membership-driven organization of over 2,000 street vendors, folks from all across the 5 boroughs. And I think, a really important thing to know about street vendors is as our organization, we are supporting folks across many different languages, right? There's 90% of street vendors are immigrants from other parts of the world who have chosen to come to New York City and to make a living and provide for their families as street vendors and starting their own business. So as an organization, we started about 20 years ago with the interest of having a centralized voice of street vending in New York City, because there were just so many one-off policies that were coming together and taking away the rights of street vendors. And so having a unified voice, growing the power of the street vending community, and ensuring that the impact of the vending community and industry on New York City was truly understood.
So were street vendors a vulnerable population during the pandemic, or possibly even before the pandemic?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, unfortunately, the communities in New York City who were the most impacted and devastated by the pandemic were those who were marginalized before, right? Who were set up for failure. Again, back to these long-standing policies of discrimination against street vendors that have forced them to be in a quote-unquote excluded economy, right? Not having the appropriate business licensing or even the access to acquire it, set it up so that street vendors could not access grants or loans for small businesses. And it also set it up so that they, whether it was due to immigration status or due to being cash economy workers, were ineligible for unemployment.
And on your website, you state in recent years, vendors have become victims of New York's aggressive quality of life crackdown. Can you just elaborate on that? What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so street vendors, to me, to many New Yorkers, are our city's smallest businesses. They are the folks who are out on street corners keeping us safe. I know I feel safer when I walk home at night and I see a street vendor who I know and I have like a good rapport with, or whenever I'm going to work early in the morning and I need to grab like a hot cup of champurrado, somebody's there for me, right? That to me is what community is. That to me is what, a solid neighborhood is, when there's street vendors around keeping one another safe. But unfortunately, for far too long, city policies have actually taken down street vendors from their ability to exist, right? Have targeted street vendors because they're accessible, right? There used to be, the NYPD, which was in charge of street vending enforcement. And only until this year, they were in charge of it, right? It's only the law or the policy only changed this year in January. And so moms, dads, kids who are out working as street vendors were being targeted by the NYPD, their materials thrown out, oftentimes just so that the officer could meet a quota, right? So by the end of the month, because street vending was considered a crime by the city of New York, they were targeted and could be arrested, and also could have their materials confiscated.
So we actually get to see this aggressiveness. Your team posted a video of the New York City Sanitation Department destroying a vendor's produce stand. We can hear the anger and disappointment from the community in the video. Do you know why the city was allowed or ordered to do such a thing?
Yeah, and I to directly respond to that, it's what people saw on video happening here with Diana's produce stand being thrown into the garbage, right? This wasn't the first time this has happened to a street vendor. And this may not be the last time it will happen to a street vendor unless legislation is passed to change this. Because Diana did not have a permit to vend fruits and vegetables. This is not for lack of trying, right? There has been a cap on the number of mobile food vendor permits in place for almost 40 years. And so Diana has actually tried multiple times to go to the city to try and acquire a permit. She wants to pay her taxes. She wants to pay her business, but she's been unable to get one because of this cap on the number of permits available. There's actually only about 5,000 total mobile food vendor permits available for the entire city of New York, right? For almost 8 million people, there's almost 20,000 street vendors, and only 5,000 are given the opportunity to formalize their business, whereas everyone else is forced into this excluded economy like Diana, where they're providing a service, right? Their community loves and appreciates them, as seen on the video. People are there saying, leave her alone. We care about her. We want her here. But unfortunately, this is what the city has set up.
So I understand that vendors receive $1,000 tickets for minor violations. What do these violations actually look like?
Yeah, so the main violation that would garner a $1,000 fine is for not having a permit if you're a mobile food vendor, and for not having a license if you're a general merchandise vendor. So if you don't have a permit for mobile food vending, you can receive a ticket of up to $1,000. And if you do not have a general vendor license, because there's also a cap on those, there's only 853 total general merchandise licenses available. If you don't have one of those, you'll get a $250 fine.
I understand with street vendors, most are immigrants and people of color. Do you think their background is why they face these harsh consequences, especially when compared to larger businesses?
Absolutely. I think, street vendors, again, are our city's smallest businesses. Folks are 90% immigrants, primarily immigrants of color, and also military veterans. That's actually how street vending has really become, street vending was seen as an avenue for economic opportunity for military veterans returning from war who didn't necessarily have access to capital, but could get a permit or a license and start small, right? Start small and build up to grow their business. And so I absolutely think because there's primarily folks who are immigrants who English is not their first language, there's also, a history of abuse against street vendors where police officers or enforcement officials are speaking only in English, communicating rules and regulations only in English, and not even taking advantage of language resource lines that the city is required by law to provide. And so there is absolutely a discrimination.
Now, it may be hard to fully navigate, but are there any rights these vendors have that they may be unaware of? What should they know when they're out there on the street?
A primary one is that NYPD, as of January 2021, is no longer the main enforcement agency for street vending. It's actually the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, which has formed an Office of Street Vendor Enforcement. So that has been a major change, but unfortunately, NYPD does have a very widespread power over New York City. So anything that's considered a public safety issue does fall under the guise of the NYPD, under the purview of the NYPD. So abandoned fruits and vegetables is technically a public safety issue. And by abandoned, I mean not having a permit to prove that you're an owner.
Now, can you just quickly tell us where can people go to learn more about your organization?
Sure. So to learn more about our organization, the Street Vendor Project, you can visit us on Twitter at Vendor Power or on Instagram at Street Vendor Project, or our website is also here below, streetvendor.org. And I will say maybe just one more piece about what rights street vendors do have. I can share a map, which is on our Instagram or on our social media as well, that shows where street vendors can set up, right? So there's a lot of rules and regulations for sighting rules for street vendors. So it's very important for vendors to actually always carry a measuring tape with them, so they can prove when they are in a legal setup.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carina. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll be right back with more Open BXRX Tuesday. Welcome back. It's that time of year again. Flu season is quickly approaching as we move towards the colder months. But what is flu season and what can we do to protect ourselves in the wake of a pandemic? Joining us for a discussion on flu season is Dr. Cariane Matos of Montefiore Health System. Doctor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So we're just going to jump right into it. Dr. Matos, I first like to address the misconceptions about weather and the flu. Can you explain what happens when we get the flu? And does weather play a huge role in this?
So that's a great question. So the most important factor for you getting the flu is actually being exposed to the virus itself. If you haven't come in contact with somebody that has the infection, you can't really get it. So the weather doesn't really play a role in your ability to get the infection. There have been some studies that show that it is possible that the flu virus can become a little bit more stable and easier to transmit, and that might be why we see peaks during the fall and winter months versus the summer. But essentially, cold weather is not really what's going to factor into your risk.
So, as a health professional, what are your concerns as we approach this time?
So my major concerns are that as the weather gets colder, we're going to start gathering more indoors, doing less things in the open air environment, and potentially having some family gatherings in closed environments. And that is most likely the biggest risk for you to be able to get infected or to transmit an infection like the flu.
So the COVID vaccine still remains very controversial for some, but many are or were encouraged to get it as we approach flu season. Would you consider the flu vaccine just as important?
Absolutely. And in reality, unfortunately, a lot of the controversy with the COVID vaccine is mostly because of misinformation. And it's a very safe vaccine. But just as we are encouraging people to get the COVID vaccine, the flu vaccine is just as important because it can protect you, your friends, your family members from getting this infection or becoming ill enough to need to be hospitalized.
So my next question is it safe for people to get both the COVID and flu vaccine? I know a lot of people are already afraid of getting the COVID vaccine, and now we're adding another one on top of that. What are your thoughts, and is it safe for our families?
They are very safe, both individually and they're safe to be administered together. Really, the most common side effects for either of those vaccines is tenderness at the site of the injection, some swelling and redness. And those symptoms tend to get better within a day or so. And having them both together, both of them are still going to give you antibodies to protect you against these infections. And two, just because you're getting them together doesn't mean that you're going to get more side effects or worse side effects. They're completely safe. And if you haven't gotten the COVID vaccine yet, you should definitely get it. If it happens to coincide when you're getting your flu vaccine, that's not going to be an issue.
And so I love that you kind of mentioned the symptoms. Can we go over that a little closely? Because I know a lot of people will say, I got the flu vaccine and I got sick, so I'm not going to get it again. Can you just explain what vaccines actually do and why that's important?
Absolutely. So that is an awesome question because a lot of people tend to have that misconception as well. So the flu vaccine in itself, you cannot get the flu virus from it. The majority of the vaccines don't actually have a live flu virus in them. If anything, they might actually have a piece of the virus or they might have a non-live virus, which the reason why that's there is to make sure that you can create antibodies that can recognize this infection and give you protection. But you cannot get the infection itself. Most often, we're getting these vaccines around the time where the flu season starts. So it is possible that you may have already been infected when you go get the shot and then, in fact, develop a full infection, but you were in the incubation period when you got the vaccine. But you cannot actually get the infection from the flu virus from the flu vaccine itself.
Okay, thank you so much for that because I was just always really curious about that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question.
So, at the start of the pandemic, there was this idea that COVID and the flu were very similar, and at times, many people claimed they were exactly the same based on their symptoms. Is this true?
So, unfortunately, in the beginning, we didn't have a lot of information about what this virus was, what the symptoms to look out for. And it's because it was a brand mutated coronavirus that we had never seen or treated before. We knew from the beginning that it was a different virus. Separate from the virus. If anything, the only thing that they share in common is that they cause respiratory infections and they can be spread rapidly. But besides that, they're completely separate virus families. They don't cause the same infection. Um, the fact that we didn't know what was going on because we didn't have a lot of cases when this first emerged meant that we unfortunately did not transmit the correct information in the beginning. We weren't able to tell people what to look out for. And we unfortunately learned things like the easy transmission rates of this virus, how deadly it was along the way of the progress of the pandemic, because we then acquired experience when we were going through the peaks when it first happened in California and Washington State and in New York and now in some of the southern states. A lot of this information didn't really exist before a year ago. So that had a lot to do with the confusion and the lack of clear answers that we had in the beginning.
So, do they have any symptoms at all that are similar that can also make it confusing for some people?
So the overlap in symptoms between these viruses is so big that it is virtually impossible for you to be able to differentiate them just based on symptoms. They both cause fevers, chills, sore throat, general feelings of achiness and pain everywhere, tiredness. In some people, they can also get diarrhea, upset stomach. So it's very difficult. And it wouldn't be wise for somebody to say, I don't really have all of the symptoms that match me for COVID, so I'm not going to go seek attention or help. And it's also super important to keep in mind that for both influenza and for COVID, the therapy we have available majorly depends on our ability to diagnose you early when symptoms start, because after about a week or so of symptoms, the medications have not been proven to work. So it's very important that if you do have symptoms, go get tested. It's very broadly available. And if you do have an infection, that can be treated and managed.
So that's so interesting that you say that, because that was going to be my next question. What can people look out for, just to see if like maybe if they're different or anything like that? But what do you suggest if someone's a little bit unsure, if they don't know if they have the flu or COVID?
So again, get tested as soon as you start getting symptoms. If you're worried because you don't have a good sense of smell or taste, or you're starting to get fevers or cough, basically there are still many testing sites all over the city that are offering either free or low cost testing. Visit your primary care doctor, who often can also do a flu test or a COVID test, and get the answer. Because as I said, if we know that you have the infection early on, we can give you the therapies that can either slow down the symptoms or prevent you from getting ill enough to need to be in the hospital.
So this is going to be, a time in our lives where, we're very vulnerable in regards to health. I just want to know, is it possible to have both of them at the same time? And what does that look like in your body?
Yeah, so unfortunately, because they are two different viruses, you can get infected with either of them at the same time. Um, we don't really have a lot of experience with dealing with both infections at the same time, because last year we barely had any flu cases. A lot of that had to do with the fact that the same protective measures that we're doing for COVID also protect you from flu and other respiratory viruses, like masking, keeping 6 feet apart, not going out when sick, avoiding crowded places. So it's hard to tell whether or not you're going to get very sick from both of the viruses. Just if you get co-infected, I would assume so, because if you already have underlying conditions like asthma, chronic respiratory conditions, hypertension, if you're pregnant, or small children already, when they may potentially be infected with the flu, potentially could have worser outcomes. So if you were to get infected with a second virus, it is possible that you may also have a severe disease from the subsequent virus.
So you mentioned a little bit that we took these preventative measures last year, but I feel like I see a lot of people kind of relaxing on those measures. So I'm seeing more people, not wear their mask or not staying 6 feet. Do you have any fears about that as we approach this flu season? Just about how more relaxed we've been when it comes to COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that how maybe comfortable we may have become since the vaccinations for COVID have become available may increase our potential flu cases this season. And my advice for my patients and for anybody watching this broadcast would be to still mask as much as possible. Avoid going to crowded places if you're not feeling well. Continue to distance yourself 6 feet from people that you don't know or not from your household, because really these same techniques are good for any type of respiratory infection, including the flu.
All right. And lastly, can you just tell people where they can go to learn more information about keeping their family safe?
Absolutely. So the flu vaccine is very widely available, so you should be able to get it either at any community pharmacy or big retail pharmacy like Walgreens, CVS, etc. You should also be able to get it at your primary care clinic. Highly encouraged to call your doctors to see if they have it available and when you can get it from them. And Montefiore partners with Walgreens and has available sites at free or low cost to anybody who would like to get the vaccine.
All right, Doctor, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
We'll be right back.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
Welcome back. A group of individuals, local community, faith, and labor organizations across the Bronx collaborated to plan for the future of the borough. That same group, called the Bronx-Wide Coalition, is also planning a Bronx People's Festival. We'll now turn to a short clip about the mission of these Bronx leaders.
Every day in the Bronx, we take care of each other. We take care of family and our neighbors. We teach, learn, guide, and share with each other. We share resources through susus and parnas and sociedades. We share food and cook for each other. We take care of us. And we can create a Bronx economy that provides for our basic needs, a better life, and a deeper freedom. We hope you'll join us in transforming our Bronx.
Join the Bronx-Wide Coalition in continuing our work to build power and co-create the future of the Bronx for us and by us at the Bronx People's Festival on Saturday, October 23rd, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Mary Mitchell Center, located at 2007 Mates Avenue.
Joining us for a discussion on the Bronx-Wide Coalition and the festival is Director of Community Development at the Point CDC, Dariella Rodriguez, and Program Director of Laal, Shahela Begum. Thank you both for joining us. So can you tell us who the Bronx-Wide Coalition is?
Sure. Hi. So the Bronx-Wide Coalition is made up of local residents as well as community, faith, and labor groups across the Bronx. We have 12 organizations in our leadership team and nearly 30 organizations in the broader coalition who have endorsed one or both of our policy platforms. The coalition came together in the fall of 2019 to co-create a federal level policy platform as an important strategy to engage both local residents and candidates running for Congress in 2020, knowing the impact of that seat that seat had on our borough. Early this year, we also created a local level platform, and our organizations engaged tens of thousands of residents through civic engagement. But we know that work does not end at the voting booth. This past spring, we launched our Bronx-wide planning process to create a long-term economic development plan for our borough, which we'll talk more about. And I'm at the point, and just saying the point joined this coalition and part of the leadership team because so many great people have been doing amazing, important work across the Bronx, but we're unfortunately forced to work in silos and in hyper-local campaigns. And we knew that the issues that we were working on were definitely connected, and we really needed to come together across the Bronx.
Thank you. And Shahela, can you tell us about how your organization got involved?
Yeah, Bangladeshis in the Bronx are a growing population, but we lack representation. So joining this coalition allows our community to get civically engaged while making space for us, for elected officials to listen to us.
And now, so there's so many moving parts in this. Can you tell us, how the collaboration began? And then, what made you decide personally to join?
So in a few years ago, in preparation for not just like the congressional race that was coming, but knowing that we needed to like unite organizations and groups that were already doing work across the Bronx. So we started processes of like visioning and coming together, building principles, and that was before the pandemic. So throughout the pandemic, we've been really shifting to having virtual programming, uniting people through virtual meetings, in our outdoor spaces, being creative as much as we can. I think Shahela could share a little bit about why Laal joined the coalition too.
Now, I understand racial justice and economic democracy are key values and frameworks that are important to the work of the coalition. Why is that important for you, and what does that mean for the Bronx?
Yeah, we know that in order to address the challenges that we as Bronxites face, we need to be pushing for systemic change. For us, that means addressing the root of the issues and not just putting bandages on what's not working. And that systemic change for us must be grounded in racial justice and economic democracy. So for us, racial justice means putting people of color at the center, and their experiences should be uplifted. And we know that the Bronx, like so many places across the country, has been impacted by racist policies like redlining and other forms of discrimination and inequity over the decades. So we believe that those most impacted by these experiences should be centered now, and that will help create equity. All are welcome into this work, and we prioritize the experiences and voices of those most impacted historically and historically excluded. Economic democracy is important to us because in our current economy, the resources and wealth of our city are mostly controlled by a very small few. It is clear that the concentration of wealth translates into a concentration of power over our Bronx future, and we want to change that. Economic democracy means sharing ownership, power, and control over the assets and resources in our communities and working together to co-govern and make decisions collectively about what happens here.
All right, well, thank you so much for that. So now I kind of want to talk a little about something that's exciting, super exciting that's coming up. So on October 23rd, the coalition is inviting Bronxites to attend the Bronx People's Festival. Can you tell us what this event is about?
Yes, so we're very excited to talk about it. First, this event is our first opportunity for our community members across the Bronx to connect with the coalition since the pandemic, because we've been, connected remotely. We want to have fun and be interactive. It's our first in-person event because of the pandemic, and we think it's important for folks to meet each other and continue to build community across the borough. We're going to have music, free food, games, prizes. It's also a family-friendly event, and we'll have activities for kids, youth, and adults. You'll get a chance to meet not just the coalition, but the individual organizations across the Bronx who are doing work, and how you can get involved locally, and you can stay connected to our Bronx-wide work and the process. Most importantly, we really need you to come out and share your ideas. This is an opportunity to come share your ideas, your concerns, your questions, because the work that we're doing is reflective of the work that has been going on in the Bronx for decades, led by those who participate in the process along the way. So it is our goal to share space with as many people in the Bronx as we possibly can. We feel that the more people who come together to design the Bronx-wide plan, the more reflective it is of our communities and the people of the Bronx, and therefore the more successful it will be.
So can you tell us, you kind of mentioned it a little bit, but why is it important, I guess just in general, for the community to be involved in opportunities like this?
Like Shahela said earlier, currently decisions about what happens in our neighborhoods and across the city are very disconnected from each other and from the issues that we deal with daily. Those decisions happen behind the scenes or as part of processes that almost never center or prioritize the needs of tenants, students, workers, immigrants, people of color, the workers in our communities, right? So although many groups across the Bronx have gotten some big wins over the decades, we know that we can't just spend all of our time or even most of our time just fighting against the things that we don't want in our community. That means that we have to envision and plan towards and build what we do want in our community. So with our Bronx-wide planning process and our engagement during these events, like our People's Assemblies that happen in the spring and summer, and then the Bronx People's Festival that's happening now, we're coming together as one Bronx to share the amazing ideas our communities have already come up with, and also to come up with new solutions to create a holistic plan that really reflects what is most important to all of us. We're also coming together to make sure that we build community power. We need to make our vision become a reality, right? So we need to build with each other. We need to come together and unite to make this plan successful and become a reality. And we just want to say that if you really care about having a real say in shaping the future of the Bronx for yourself, for your family, for your neighbors, we just want you to connect with other Bronx sites who have the same commitment and vision. And so that's why we're asking people to join us at the Bronx People's Festival. We're going to really make sure that we center joy, healing, and having fun in our spaces. And we're going to do a lot of fun, amazing, transformative work together. It's important for all of us to share with our community that it's important for us to share that all community members are welcome. Your experience living and working in the Bronx means that you know what isn't working, and therefore that means you have the best ideas on how to make things better. And so we're asking you to please join us.
So can you just tell us, how can people learn more about your work and get involved?
To learn more about who we are, our work, and to access resources, you can go to our linktree/BXPower. At the Bronx People's Festival, you'll get a chance to connect with our core organizations that are based across the Bronx. Becoming a member of one of those organizations is one great way to stay connected in between our Bronx-wide engagements. And you can also check out our social media platforms for some of our core organizations. The Point's handle is @ThePointCDC. Laal's is @LaalNYC. And BCDI is another one of our coordination team members, and you can check them out at Bronx Future.
All right. Thank you both so much for joining us once again.
Thank you.
That's all for our show today. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Kibin, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.